Hi, this is Dallas Shepard with you at the Harmonized Brain Centers, and I'm excited about your upcoming weekend and the immersive weekend that's going to be able to touch you at your deepest element of your life, at your soul, at your heart, and in your mind. I believe that the greatest commandment, as told in Matthew 22:37, to love your God with all your soul, with all your heart, and with all your mind. Today, I'm going to be able to talk to you a little bit about how we can help your mind, your brain work more efficiently so you can process information, you can get rid of the anger, the hurt, the bitterness, whatever it is that's inside of you to be able to come to the surface, to be able to hand it over to God, and that He can truly give you a healing experience. To do this, I'm going to be able to introduce to you my beautiful assistant, Crystal, and she's extremely clear thinking. The jokes are bad and they won't get any better. I can guarantee you that. But neurofeedback is really just a methodology of looking at the electrical activity in the brain. If you stop and think about it, our brain, all it operates on is an electrical impulse and a chemical response. If it's a thought, an idea, a memory, an emotion, a fear, an excitement, all that it is an electrical activity and a chemical response. The question always comes in, does the electrical cause the chemical or the chemical cause the electrical? For the sake of argument, it's really a combination of both. But today we're going to be talking to you about neurofeedback and what that does. And to help do that, again, Crystal, as you can see, she has a bunch of different dots on her head. And each one of these dots represents a different functional area in the brain. As a brief explanation, our C sites that are right here in the middle, this is what we call the sensory motor strip. This is where our brain tells our body the difference between hot, cold, smooth, rough, fine motor skills are all integrated through this part of the brain. Coming to the back of the brain, back on the back ridge, this is what we call the parietal lobe. The parietal lobe is dealing more with cognitive processing, thinking deeper, putting concepts together. If you're reading a book or watching a movie, it's the subplot, the character development, the things that are going on behind the scenes, just deeper concepts. If you're thinking in math terms, it's more like algebra, geometry, trigonometry, astrophysics, quantum physics, those type of things where you're having to put concepts and ideas that are a little bit more abstract. All the way here at the back of the brain, this is what we call the occipital lobe. And the occipital lobe is visual processing. And visual processing is a lot more than just the light that comes through our eyes. It's how do we interpret everything that's going on. If you've ever seen or been in an auto accident, a lot of times they'll hit the front of their head, but they'll also hit the back of their head on the headrest. And they'll talk about their peripheral vision is lost and they have tunnel vision. They'll talk about an extreme sensitivity to light uh, and that type of thing. And they're not able to track when they're reading or they're overwhelmed just trying to read because their eyes can't, both eyes are not able to track and follow. That's all part or damage to the occipital lobe. But there's also a part on the back of the occipital lobe is the OZ. And this area is the closest to our autonomic nervous system. Heart rate, breathing, incontinence, those type of things. That's all being done at the OZ, part of the occipital lobe. But when we jump back to the right side on our temporal lobe from our ear back, this is our T4, T6. These are areas that are dealing more with emotion, emotional memory, and emotional understanding. And you've probably heard people talk about being left brain, right brain. This is really where it's coming from. The right side over here, this is dealing more with the emotion, but it's also a very creative side of the brain. But we jump all the way to the other side, or T3 and T5. This is dealing more with verbal memory and verbal understanding. And it's a very logical side of the brain. But it's also language is all along this left ridge. So if you've ever seen somebody that's been impacted on the left side of the brain from a traumatic brain injury or have had a stroke, a lot of times they can read a word, write a word, but they can't tell you the object that I'm sitting in right now, a chair. It's not that they don't know it, their brain is not able to process it. So when we jump up here to the frontal lobe is executive function. This is where we make decisions, knowing right from wrong, good from bad, but all over here is verbal expression, and over here is emotional expression. So a lot of times we find anxiety and those type of issues hang out over here, and depression hangs out over on the left frontal lobe. So when I say hangs out, what we're meaning is we're looking again at the electrical activity in the brain. And the electrical activity, when we do that, all we're doing is taking an electrocephalogram, a raw EEG, and we're reading that information and we're able to manipulate that and be able to see how it's doing with the brain. So to help explain that, we also have brain waves. So when we do the activity, we're looking at your different brain waves, and we have four different types. You have your delta, theta, alpha, and beta waves. Each one of these is grouped together and they have different functionalities that are associated with them. And they're really into cycles per second. The big and slow ones are delta waves, and they're attributed more with deep sleep and healing. Theta, if this is where we wake up, it's almost to the awake state, but not quite. More on the sleep, it's a dream state, a creative state, that type of thing, and a meditative state also. Then we jump into alpha. Alpha is we're more or less on the awake side, but not necessarily engaged. If you're staring out the window daydreaming, you have a lot of alpha that is dominating in your brain. So when we, with the alpha, is again on the awake side, and the other part of the awake cycle is beta waves. That's where our brain is up, functioning, and getting things done. Beta also is broken down into low, medium, and high beta, but when we get into that higher beta, that's also where we jump into flight, fright, or freeze mode. Okay. So all our brain waves, people ask me all the time, is there one brain wave that's more important than another? Not really. We need them all. The issue is we need our brain to be able to transfer when it calls upon it. So all that we're doing with neurofeedback is this. We're overlaying the electrical activity on top of each one of these functional areas. And when we see a disparity, that's typically where we'll start seeing dysfunction show up. And the way we measure that is in the electrical activity, but we're also looking at the power in a site. We're also looking at the flexibility in the site, and also what is the most dominant frequency. Better example, or one that I think most people get or understand. Imagine you have a couple seats to a symphony. You are going with some friends and you're excited and you're there 45 minutes early. Man, you're having a great time, conversations going, you're excited about the concert. But all of a sudden, the violins are playing over here, the oboes are playing, somebody's beating on the drum, somebody's blowing on the horns, and it's absolute chaos. And in this chaos, it's hard to even have a conversation with the people that are right next to you because of all this noise that's going on. Now, you have to ask a couple questions. Is there anything wrong with the instruments up there? No, they're just warming up. Is there anything wrong with the performers at this point? No, they're just warming up and they're not playing on the same sheet of music and at the same time. So imagine each one of these functional areas is a different instrument in your symphony. What happens if they're not playing together? You get chaos. What does that chaos look like? I don't know. The brain controls everything. It might be anger, it might be anxiety, depression, can't follow what I'm reading, can't remember what I just read, hearing instructions and not able to follow them to the end. It might be just mass migraines or seizure disorders. You name it, the brain controls it. So neurofeedback is a methodology to be able to help your brain self-regulate that information. And that's really what brings us to what we're going to call, or what is called LENS neurofeedback. LENS stands for low energy neurofeedback. So what we're doing in this system, we're actually taking the readings, the raw EEG, we're taking those readings, we identify a dominant frequency, we send it back to the brain with an offset to help the brain resettle itself. Easier way to kind of understand that. Think about somebody that's caught in an anxiety loop. You know, when somebody is caught, something has happened, and that's all that they can think about. It just goes around and around and around. In, in essence, it's caught in a rut, or it's caught in a frequency, a dominant frequency, and it's just going around and around. So, what LENS is doing, we're coming along and pinging that dominant frequency, and then the brain has to make a decision where it wants to go. The brain doesn't like being stuck. That's not the way we're designed, that's not the way we were created. But unfortunately, we get that way sometimes. So, when we do that, the brain tags that dominant frequency, the brain makes an adjustment to get into a new pattern. Now, somebody in that, typically in that anxiety loop, they're able to take in information, process it, deal with it, and it doesn't have to escalate to a part of panic, overload, or not able to take in other information. In essence, we're relaxing the brain so it can function at its optimal level. Now, I know that this was just a brief introduction to LENS neurofeedback, or neurofeedback in general. I hope that you find it beneficial and helpful, but I also want to just go back to what I originally started. You are going to have an incredible weekend. I firmly believe that God's going to move mightily in your life. We're going to be using LENS and a lot of other techniques such as heart sync, massage therapies, eating great, wonderful meals together, just building community, some great worship, and all of those things are really going to come back to how do we help you create your greatest mind, your soul, and your heart. Thank you for